When I was 8 years old, I watched my mother drive away with a man I barely knew. She didn't cry. She didn't even look back. I remember standing at the porch with my backpack half open, clutching the lunch she had packed that morning, peanut butter sandwich, still warm from her hands. I didn't know it would be the last meal she'd ever make for me. People say memories fade, but that one never did. The sound of gravel under her tires, the way the wind lifted her hair as she smiled at her new family waiting in the car. That image carved itself into my mind like a scar that never quite heals. If you're listening to this and believe that family should mean more than shared DNA, I want you to stay with me. Subscribe to this channel because here we talk about truth, the kind that hurts, heals, and reminds you that love is about who stays, not who leaves. After she left, it was my grandparents who picked up the pieces. They taught me how to live without asking why she didn't want me. My grandfather's voice still echoes in my head. You can't force someone to love you, but you can choose to love better. My grandmother would hum while folding my clothes, pretending everything was fine. But every time the phone rang and it wasn't her, I saw the truth in Grandma's eyes, hope dying a little more each year. I used to tell myself that one day Mom would come back. Maybe she'd bring balloons, or a cake, or even just a letter saying she was sorry. But years passed, birthdays blurred, and silence became her only gift. Still, I grew up surrounded by the kind of love that doesn't vanish. The kind that stays through scraped knees, cold winters, and empty seats at school plays. My grandparents became my whole world, steady, kind, and always there when she wasn't. But nothing could prepare me for the day she finally did come back. Because when she knocked on my door 20 years later, she wasn't bringing love or apologies. She was bringing a lawsuit. And trust me, what came after that will make everything you just heard feel like the calm before the storm. After my mother left, my grandparents' house became my entire universe. It smelled like cinnamon and old books, and it was the only place that didn't make me feel temporary. But even that kind of love couldn't fill the silence she left behind. Every night before bed, I'd stare at the hallway, waiting for footsteps that never came. One day, I realized I wasn't waiting for her anymore. I was waiting for the pain to stop. If you've ever been abandoned and had to rebuild yourself from the pieces someone else dropped, you'll understand this part of my story. And if you haven't yet, I promise there's something here you'll need one day. That's why I want you to subscribe. Not just for me, but for every person learning that family is who shows up, not who disappears. My grandparents never talked badly about her. They just lived the lesson she failed to teach. Presence. My grandfather would wake me at dawn to help him in the garden, saying that everything worth keeping takes patience. Grandma always said baking was her therapy, mixing sugar and forgiveness until both dissolved. I didn't realize then how hard they were fighting to give me a normal life. When I turned 16, Grandpa handed me an old notebook. Inside were letters he'd written, but never sent, to my mother. Each one softer than the last, begging her to visit, to call, to remember. She never did. That night, Grandma found me crying over the pages. She didn't say anything. She just pulled me close and whispered, "Some people leave, so we can learn what love truly means." Those words shaped everything that came after. The way I studied, worked, and tried to build something they could be proud of. I promised myself I'd never need anything from the woman who walked away. But fate has a way of circling back. Years later, when the inheritance came into my life, I thought it was a blessing. I didn't realize it would reopen every wound she left behind. Because money doesn't change people, it only shows who they really are. And soon, I was about to find out exactly who my mother had become. The night my grandmother died, the house went silent in a way I'd never heard before. No creaking floors, no humming from the kitchen, just emptiness. I sat beside her bed, holding her hand, wishing I could trade every dollar I'd ever earn for one more morning with her cinnamon rolls and quiet laughter. That was the night I made her a promise. I'd protect what she and Grandpa built. I just didn't know that promise would turn into a war. If you've ever lost the only person who truly saw you, you know that kind of pain doesn't fade. It becomes part of who you are. That's why I keep sharing my story here. If you believe love is measured by presence, not perfection, then subscribe. You'll understand why some promises are worth keeping, even when it hurts. Grandma used to tell me that forgiveness was like her lemon cake recipe, sweet, but only if you mix it with honesty. After she passed, I found her old journal tucked behind the flour tin, filled with recipes and handwritten notes about life. On one page she wrote, "Love isn't inherited. It's chosen." Over and over again. Those words became my compass. I finished law school because of her. Every time I wanted to quit, I'd picture her apron dusted with flour and her tired hands still kneading dough for me. She never had much, but she gave me everything that mattered: kindness, strength, and a reason to believe that goodness always finds its way back. When Grandpa's health began to fail, I knew I had to stay. He was all I had left, and I wasn't going to break that promise. He'd sit on the porch, staring at the horizon, saying that Grandma was waiting there, somewhere beyond the sunset. What I didn't know was that while I was keeping my word, someone else, someone I never expected, was getting ready to break theirs. And when that day came, it would turn my grandmother's promise into the fight of my life. I was sitting in the lawyer's office, half listening, when I heard the words, $3 million. My heart skipped. I thought he was talking about someone else. Grandpa had always been generous, but that number felt unreal. And then I realized he had left it all to me. Every cent. No mention of my mother anywhere. That silence was louder than the number itself. People assume inheriting money feels like winning, but it felt more like losing again. The lawyer slid the folder across the table and said something about his final wishes. I couldn't move. It wasn't just an inheritance. It was a message from the man who raised me. A final act of love and protection. I used the inheritance carefully. Paid off Grandpa's medical debts. Donated to the local clinic he used to volunteer at. Nothing fancy. Every decision felt like a conversation with him. But word travels fast in small towns, especially when it involves money. And somehow, it traveled farther than I expected. A few months later, I got a message request from someone I hadn't seen or heard from in over 20 years. Her profile picture showed a smiling family, beach vacation, matching shirts. My stomach turned. It was her. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Then she sent another message. "I think we should talk about what your grandfather left behind." That's when I realized my mother wasn't reaching out to reconnect. She was coming back for something else. And the moment I opened her next message, everything I thought I knew about forgiveness shattered. Because she wasn't asking. She was demanding. The first time I saw her name pop up on my phone, my hands went cold. 20 years of silence, and suddenly, "We need to talk about the inheritance." Not "how are you?" Not "I miss you." Just business. It felt like the kind of message you'd get from a stranger, not the woman who gave you life. I wish I could say I ignored her, but curiosity is cruel. I opened the message. She said she'd heard about Grandpa's estate and wanted to make things right. I almost laughed. Make things right? You can't patch up 2 decades of abandonment with a legal claim. A week later, she showed up at my doorstep. Same perfume. Same cold eyes. But older, lines carved by the choices she made. Behind her stood 2 teenagers, her new family. She smiled like we were just picking up where we left off. "I just wanted to see you," she said, stepping inside without waiting for an answer. She looked around, scanning every detail of the house like she was appraising it. "Dad always said I'd regret leaving," she whispered. He was right. I stood frozen, torn between rage and pity. For a moment, I wanted to believe she meant it, that maybe guilt had finally caught up with her. But then she asked, "Did the lawyer mention me in the will?" And just like that, any trace of love died again. I told her no, that Grandpa left everything to me. Her face hardened. The warmth vanished like it had never existed. She said, "That's not fair," as if fairness was something she ever gave me. I didn't know then, but that sentence was just the beginning. Because a few weeks later, I wouldn't just be facing my mother. I'd be facing her lawyer. And what they planned next would make abandonment look like kindness. They called it discovery. I called it humiliation. Every file, photo, and fragment of my life was suddenly under a microscope, proof that I hadn't manipulated the man who raised me. My mother's lawyer said Grandpa was not of sound mind when he wrote the will. But the thing about people who abandon you is they never understand what you gave up to survive. I remember sitting across from my lawyer, surrounded by boxes of old letters and receipts. He asked if I had anything that showed how close Grandpa and I were. I laughed, because how do you prove love? It's not in paperwork. It's in birthdays never missed, phone calls returned, the smell of pancakes on Sunday mornings. Things no courtroom could ever measure. When we finally walked into court, my hands were shaking. I'd never seen her so calm. She wore a black dress, like she was attending a funeral. Maybe she was just not mine. Her lawyer painted me as a manipulative orphan who took advantage of an old man's guilt. The words stung more than I expected. Then my lawyer stood and placed a box on the table. Inside were letters. Dozens of them. All written by my grandfather, to her. Each one asking her to visit, to call, to remember her daughter. Every one unanswered. The silence in the courtroom was louder than any argument. Even the judge looked away for a moment. They say absence is invisible, but in that room, it was undeniable. Her absence wasn't a mistake. It was a choice, carved into every year she stayed gone. As I listened, I realized this case wasn't about money at all. It was about rewriting history, pretending she'd cared all along. But the truth was already written, not in ink, but in the spaces between the words. And as powerful as that moment felt, I had no idea that the real confrontation, the one that would change everything, was still ahead. Because next time, I wouldn't just be defending my grandfather's memory. I'd be defending myself. The day of the final hearing, the courtroom felt smaller than usual. Maybe it was because everything had already been said, every accusation, every lie, but none of it had touched what really mattered. My mother sat across from me, arms folded, her expression a mix of pride and defiance. I wondered if she ever felt shame, or if she'd buried it somewhere so deep she forgot it existed. When she took the stand, she played the part perfectly. Her voice trembled at the right moments, tears forming just enough to glisten under the fluorescent lights. She talked about being shut out, about a daughter who turned her father against her. I almost believed her. Almost. Until she said my grandfather would have changed the will if only he'd been in his right mind. That's when the anger I'd been holding for 20 years finally surfaced. When it was my turn, I stood slowly. My lawyer warned me not to get emotional, but how do you talk about love and loss without feeling them both? I told the court about the years she was gone, about how Grandpa taught me to ride a bike, patch a roof, and forgive people who didn't deserve it. I told them about the birthday cards that came back unopened and the empty chair at every Christmas dinner. And then I said something I hadn't planned. He didn't leave me his money out of guilt. He left it because he knew who stayed. The room went silent. Even her lawyer stopped taking notes. My mother's eyes met mine for the first time in years. There was something there, not remorse, but recognition. Maybe she finally saw the cost of what she'd done. The judge leaned forward, hands clasped. "We've heard enough," she said. And just like that, the performance ended. Walking out of that courtroom, I didn't feel victorious. I felt emptied, like I'd given my heart to a room full of strangers and left it there. But somewhere deep down, I knew the truth had finally spoken louder than the lies. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Because justice doesn't always end with a verdict. Sometimes it begins with what happens after. The verdict came on a quiet morning. No cameras, no whispers, no gasps, just the judge reading words that would decide the rest of my life. She said my grandfather's will stood as written. The case was dismissed. My mother's claim denied. Just like that, the storm that had followed me for months was over. But peace doesn't arrive with a gavel. It comes slowly, like a sunrise you don't notice until the light touches your face. I didn't cry. I didn't celebrate. I just sat there, letting the weight of it all settle. My lawyer smiled. People shook my hand. Yet I couldn't stop thinking about the woman who once called herself my mother, standing across the room, still believing she was the victim. As she walked past me, she didn't say a word. No apology. No anger. Just silence. The same silence she'd left me with 20 years ago. For the first time, I didn't need her to break it. I realized that the absence I'd carried all my life wasn't emptiness anymore. It was space. Space to grow, to heal, to build something that wasn't defined by blood. Family isn't who gives you life. It's who teaches you how to live it. My grandparents did that. They showed me that truth doesn't scream. It stands quietly, waiting for time to catch up. That night, I went back to their house. The garden was wild now, but the hibiscus still bloomed, stubborn and bright, just like Grandma said it would. I stood there for a long time, the smell of soil and rain around me, and finally whispered, "We did it." But even then, a part of me knew my story wasn't finished. Because healing isn't a single moment, it's a choice you make every day. And the day after the trial, when I opened my mailbox and saw the envelope with her handwriting again, I realized the truth I'd fought for was about to be tested one last time. The letter sat unopened on my kitchen table for 2 days. Her handwriting hadn't changed, sharp, deliberate, like every word was meant to leave a mark. Part of me wanted to throw it away, pretend the story ended in that courtroom. But I couldn't, so I opened it. It wasn't an apology. It never was. She wrote that she hoped we could start fresh, that money shouldn't come between family. The irony almost made me laugh. For her, family was something you claim when it's convenient. For me, it was something you build, one act of love at a time. I didn't write back. I didn't need to. Some stories don't deserve sequels. I walked to the garden, the one Grandpa planted with his bare hands, and read her words one last time before tearing the letter into pieces. The wind carried them away, scattering them between the hibiscus bushes Grandma loved. For the first time, it didn't feel like loss. It felt like release. Healing isn't loud. It's quiet mornings, making coffee in a kitchen that finally feels like home. It's remembering the people who stayed, not the ones who left. It's knowing you can love without needing proof. Now, every Sunday, I bake Grandma's lemon cake and leave a slice by her picture. Not because I'm sad, but because it reminds me of who I became, someone who kept the promise, who didn't let bitterness win. My grandparents left me more than money. They left me a legacy of presence, of grace, of truth. And maybe that's what real inheritance is, not what's written in a will, but what's written in you. I used to think my story was about being abandoned. Now I know it's about being found by the people who chose to love me anyway. If this story touched you, share it. Someone out there needs to be reminded that love doesn't leave. It stays.